Lee Si-woo had been called handsome, brilliant, and irresistible so many times he'd started to think the last one was a law of physics. Women chased him. Rooms rearranged themselves around him. His charm had never once failed anywhere. Then, at his own party, in front of everyone who adored him, a black woman in an orange dress looked at all of it and said, "No thank you," and left the most wanted man in the city standing alone in front of everyone, with his hand still half raised. For the first time in his charmed life, someone had looked straight at him and not wanted a single thing. Before we go on, tell us where you're watching from, your city, your country. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you've ever been the only person in a room who wasn't impressed by someone everybody else was falling over, stay with me to the end. Now, let me take you back to the beginning of that night. The penthouse at the top of the Don Tower in Yongsan had been built for exactly this kind of evening. 40 floors up, 3 walls of glass, the whole of Seoul laid out below in a wash of gold and violet as the sun went down over the Han River. The city looked like something a person could own. That was the point. Lee Si-woo owned a great deal of it. Tonight was the launch gala for Daeon Riverside, the biggest thing his company had ever attempted. A cultural district rising along 2 kilometers of the river, galleries and gardens and concert halls where there had been nothing but old warehouses a year ago. 300 of the most connected people in the country had come to drink his champagne and stand near him. The women wore gowns in every jewel color the light could catch. The men laughed at his jokes a half-second before he finished them. Waiters moved through the crowd like the tide. And everywhere Si-woo walked, the room quietly reorganized itself so that he was always, somehow, at the center of it. He was very good at this. That was the thing people missed about Lee Si-woo. They thought the charm was effortless, a gift he'd been born holding. It was not. It was a craft he had spent 30 years perfecting. And like all crafts done well, it looked like nothing at all. He remembered names. He remembered the name of your mother, the surgery your father had last spring, the horse you'd been trying to buy at auction. He would touch your arm at exactly the right moment and say exactly the thing you had been waiting your whole life for someone to say, and you would walk away certain that Lee Si-woo, of all the people in the world, had truly seen you. None of them had ever seen him. He'd made sure of that. It was the one rule his father had left him that actually worked. Charm is how you keep people close enough to be useful and far enough to be safe. Give them the warmth, never give them the man. "You're doing the thing," said Ethan, appearing at his elbow with 2 glasses of something amber. Ethan Cho was his chief operating officer, his oldest friend, and the only person in the building who spoke to him like a person instead of a monument. He'd grown up in Los Angeles and come back to Korea for reasons he described differently, depending on how much he'd had to drink, and he had a Californian's total immunity to being impressed. "What thing?" Si-woo said. "The thing where you make 300 people feel loved and feel nothing yourself." Ethan handed him a glass. "It's very moving. I could watch it all night. I have been watching it all night. It's a party. I'm hosting. You're performing. There's a difference. And the fact that you don't know it anymore is the saddest thing about you." Ethan nodded across the room. "Seoa's been circling for 40 minutes. She re-wore the necklace you complimented in March. That's not a coincidence. That's a campaign." Si-woo followed his gaze. Han Seoa was, by any objective measure, one of the most beautiful women in Seoul, an actress with a face that sold apartments, and skin cream, and, lately, a great deal of interest in Lee Si-woo. She caught his eye across the room and smiled the smile that had made her famous, and Si-woo returned it at exactly the wattage that would keep her hoping without committing him to anything. Because that was the trade he'd made with his whole life a long time ago. And then, over Seoa's bare shoulder, he saw the one person in the room who wasn't looking at him. She was standing by the far windows, a little apart from the crush, and she was not admiring the view, or the crowd, or, most notably, him. She had a small, worn notebook open in one hand, and she was sketching something, quick, sure strokes, her eyes moving between the page and the great curved sweep of the ceiling, as though the building itself were the only thing at the party worth her attention. She wore a deep orange dress the color of the sky going down behind her, and she wore it like a woman who had chosen it for herself and not for anyone in the room. She was black, tall, entirely composed. And she was, as far as Saiwoo could tell, completely bored. He had not seen a bored woman at one of his parties in 15 years. He found he could not look away from her. "Who is that?" he asked. Ethan followed his eyes and, to Saiwoo's mild irritation, immediately grinned. "That is Nia Warren, American. She's the urban designer running the public space design on Riverside. The plazas, the Riverwalk, all of it. She's the reason the gardens don't feel like a mall parking lot. She flew in from Chicago 3 weeks ago, and she has, so far, turned down 2 dinner invitations from board members and corrected the head of planning in front of his entire team. Politely." Ethan sipped his drink. "I like her enormously. She's sketching the ceiling. She's working. Radical concept. Someone at your party is here to do a job." Ethan's grin widened. "Leave her alone, Saiwoo. She's not one of yours." Which was, of course, precisely the wrong thing to say to a man who had never in his life been told he couldn't have something. He crossed the room. He was aware, distantly, of the current of attention that moved with him, of Seoa's smile faltering as he walked past her without stopping, of a dozen conversations, tilting to watch where the host was going. He arrived at the windows and stood beside the woman in orange, and he gave her the opening move, the one that had never once failed, the warm, slightly rueful smile, and the line delivered like a secret shared between only the two of them. "You're the only person here brave enough to be honest about the ceiling," he said. "Terrible, isn't it? I told the architect it looked like a whale's ribcage, and he told me that was the point." Nia Warren looked up from her notebook. She looked at him for a moment, unhurried, the way you might look at a man who has walked up to your table uninvited, and then she looked back at the ceiling. "It's a beautiful ceiling," she said. "The proportions are exactly right." He knew what he was doing. She made another stroke on the page. "You didn't, though. You just paid for it." Somewhere behind Saiwoo, Ethan made a sound like a man swallowing a laugh. Saiwoo recalibrated, smoothly, the way he always did. He'd been jabbed by sharper people than this, and turned it into flirtation inside of a sentence. "Guilty. I'm afraid I'm useless with anything I can't buy. Lee Saiwoo." He offered his hand, and with it, the full force of the thing that made rooms rearrange themselves. "And you've been the most interesting person at my party for the last hour, which is a low bar tonight, but you've cleared it by a mile." She did not take his hand. She closed her notebook, slid her pencil behind her ear, and looked at him then. Really looked. And Saiwoo had the unfamiliar and deeply unpleasant sensation of being read. Not admired, read. Like a floor plan. Like she could see the load-bearing walls of him, and had already worked out which ones were only there for show. "That's a very good line," she said, not unkindly. "You've used it before. The self-deprecation. The compliment that's really about you. The little pause so I feel chosen." She tilted her head. "It's genuinely excellent work. I can see why it usually lands." She picked up her clutch from the windowsill. "It's just not going to land on me. And I'd rather not waste your evening, because I'm sure there are 100 women here who'd love to have this conversation, and I am here to look at a building." "No offense meant, truly." She smiled, and it was a real smile, warm even, which somehow made it worse. "No, thank you." And Nia Warren picked up her glass from the table and walked away, and left Lee Se-woo standing alone at the window of his own penthouse, with his hand still half raised, in front of everyone. The room had gone quiet in a ring around him. Seoa's mouth was open. A gallery director near the bar had frozen with a canapé halfway to his lips. 300 people who had spent their entire lives watching everything fall toward Lee Se-woo had just watched something walk away from him, and they did not know what to do with their faces. Se-woo lowered his hand, slowly. He should have felt humiliated. He waited to feel humiliated. Instead, watching the orange dress move through the crowd toward the elevators, entirely unbothered, not once looking back, he felt something crack open in his chest that he had not felt in so long he'd forgotten its name. He turned to Ethan, who had appeared beside him, and was making no effort at all to hide his delight. "Who did you say she was?" Saiwoo said again. "Oh no," Ethan said happily. "Oh, this is going to be wonderful. If you have ever watched someone who's used to getting everything, meet the one person immune to them, You already know we're just getting started. Do me a favor and hit that like button, and tell me in the comments, have you ever been the one person in the room who wasn't impressed? Now, let's see what a man like Lee Si-woo does when charm stops working. What he did was throw the entire arsenal at it, because he did not know how to do anything else. She was on his project, which meant he had every legitimate reason in the world to be near her, and over the next 2 weeks, he used all of them. He appeared at the Riverside site office during her design reviews, ostensibly to check on progress. He had coffee sent to her from the place 3 streets over that she'd mentioned once, in passing, liking. He remembered that she was allergic to lilies and had the arrangements in the meeting rooms changed. He was attentive, warm, effortlessly interested, and he did it all with the confidence of a man who had never needed a second attempt at anything. Nia noticed every move as it landed, and named it, which nobody had ever done to him before. "That's the coffee thing," she said, the 3rd morning, when the cup appeared at her elbow. "You do a thing where you remember one small detail and give it back to the person so they feel known. It's very effective. My compliments to whoever taught it to you." She kept marking up her drawings. "I still take the coffee, though. I'm not going to punish good coffee for the sins of the man who sent it. You're a hard woman, Ms. Warren. I'm a busy one. There's a difference, and the fact that you can't tell them apart is interesting." She finally looked up. "Why are you here, Mr. Lee? Really? You have a company to run. You don't attend design reviews for the plaza drainage, and this is the plaza drainage. Maybe I've developed a sudden passion for drainage. Maybe." She went back to the drawings. "Or maybe you've never been told no, and it's the most interesting thing that's happened to you in a decade, and you've mistaken the novelty of it for something about me." She said it without heat, the way you'd point out that a wall was in the wrong place. That's not going to hold up, by the way. The novelty. Once you've been told no a few more times, it stops being fun. I'd save yourself the trouble. It should have stung. Everything she said should have stung. Instead, Si-woo found himself, for the first time in longer than he could remember, wanting to be in a room he had no advantage in. He'd spent his whole life being the most powerful person present, sitting across a drafting table from a woman who could not be charmed, corrected, or impressed. He felt something loosen in him that had been clenched so long he'd thought it was just the shape of who he was. "You keep sketching people," he said one afternoon. She'd been drawing again during a break, the same worn notebook, and he'd caught a glimpse of it. Not a building this time, but the head of planning. 3 quick lines that had somehow caught the exact anxious hunch of the man's shoulders. "You draw them like buildings. People are buildings," she said. "Everybody's holding themselves up somehow. You just have to find the load-bearing wall." She closed the book. "You learn to read it, where the real weight is, where it's just decoration, whether the thing is actually sound, or whether it's going to come down the second someone leans on it." She looked at him, and there it was again, that terrible, clear-eyed reading. "You're mostly decoration, Mr. Lee. Beautifully done. But I keep waiting to find the part that's holding you up, and I can't." The line she was about to hear back was smooth, deflecting, charming, already forming itself in the trained muscles of his face. And Si-woo, in a moment he would think about for a long time afterward, stopped it before it left his mouth. "I don't know if there is one," he said, quietly, "truly, a part holding me up. I've spent a very long time making sure nobody ever gets close enough to check, including me." The site office was loud with other people's conversations. Neither of them noticed. Nia Warren went very still, and she looked at him, and for the first time since the night of the gala, she looked at him like he might be a person, and not a very well-made facade. "Well," she said finally, and something in her voice had changed. "That's the first true thing you've said to me." He worked late that night, though there was nothing that needed doing. It had become a habit over the years, staying after everyone left, because the version of him that everyone required was exhausting to hold up, and the only place he could set it down was in an empty room. The Danan Tower penthouse was silent by midnight, the caterers gone, the city glittering 40 floors below. Si-woo poured himself a drink he didn't want, and then he sat down at the piano. It was the one thing in his life that no one knew about. There was a piano in the corner of the penthouse that guests assumed was decoration, a beautiful object that matched the room. It was not decoration. His mother had taught him to play when he was small, before the company had swallowed his father whole, and then swallowed his father's son. And it was the only thing he did that he had never once performed for anyone. He didn't play at parties. He didn't play to impress. He played alone, in the dark, badly sometimes. The same handful of pieces his mother had loved, and it was the only hour of any day in which Lee Si-woo was not selling something. He was deep into a Chopin nocturne, eyes closed, the city humming below, when a voice said from the doorway, "I forgot my notebook." He stopped so fast, the note died ugly under his hands. Nia Warren stood at the edge of the room, her field notebook in one hand, having clearly come back up for it, and found the elevator opened onto this. She was looking at him, the way you look at something you weren't supposed to see. He stood up from the bench too quickly, and the smooth thing, the deflection, the charming excuse, all of it deserted him completely, and he was just a man who had been caught doing the one real thing he did. "I didn't," he started. "The staff, usually. I wasn't expecting." "You're good," she said. Not flattering. Just true, the way she said everything. "You're really good. Why does nobody know you play?" "Because it's mine," he said, and the honesty of it surprised them both. "It's the only thing I have that nobody wants a piece of. The second people know about it, it becomes a thing they can ask me to do. A party trick, a favor, another way to be charming." He sat back down slowly. "So I don't tell anyone. You're the first person who's heard it in about 10 years, and that's only because you forgot your notebook." She should have left. He could see her decide not to. She crossed the room and sat down on the low couch near the piano, not too close, and she set her notebook on her knee, and she said, "Keep playing." So he did. He played for 20 minutes, and she didn't talk, and she didn't watch him the way women watched him at parties, waiting to be looked at. She listened, and when he finally lifted his hands, and the last note faded out into the enormous quiet room, she wasn't looking at him at all. She was looking down at her notebook, and her pencil was moving, and when she turned it around to show him, his breath stopped in his chest. It was him. At the piano. But it wasn't the man from the magazine covers, the one with the practiced smile and the load-bearing charm. She'd drawn the other one, the tired shoulders, the face with nothing selling on it. A man alone in a beautiful room, doing the one thing he loved where no one could see. She had drawn, in a handful of lines, the person Lee Si-woo had spent 30 years making sure nobody would ever find. "That's the load-bearing wall," she said quietly. "I finally found it. It was here the whole time. You just don't let anyone in the room when you're standing on it." Si-woo looked at the sketch, and then at her, and for the first time in his charmed and armored life, he could not think of a single thing to say that wasn't true. "Stay," he said. "Just, don't leave yet. Nobody's ever stayed for this part." And Nia Warren, who had walked away from him in front of 300 people, set down her pencil and stayed. "If your heart's doing something complicated right now, you're exactly where I want you. Subscribe so you don't miss how this ends, because it's about to get harder before it gets right." Now, back to it. They didn't fall into anything after that. It wasn't that kind of thing, and she wouldn't have let it be. What happened instead, over the following weeks, was slower and more dangerous. Two guarded people learning the shape of each other in the quiet hours around a project that gave them endless excuses to be in the same room. He stopped performing for her. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, harder than any negotiation, because the charm wasn't a suit he could take off. It was scar tissue, 30 years thick. But she could tell the instant he reached for it, and she'd go quiet and distant, in a way that felt like a door closing, and so he learned. He learned to answer a question with the real answer instead of the pleasant one. He learned to say, "I don't know." He learned to sit in a silence without filling it with warmth, designed to make her feel away. And the more real he was, the more she let him in, an inch at a time, on terms she set and never once apologized for. Ethan watched it happen with the smug joy of a man who'd called it on night one. "You look terrible," he told Si-woo cheerfully. "Tired, uncertain, like a person. It's the healthiest I've ever seen you." Nia told her friend Dara everything over long video calls. Dara back in Chicago, squinting at the screen. "He plays piano." Nia said. In the dark. Alone. This man everybody in Seoul thinks is a walking cologne ad, and underneath it, he's just lonely. Really lonely. And he's trying. She turned her pencil over in her fingers. The trying is the part that's getting me. I've dated men who had it easy their whole lives, and never once tried at anything. He's trying like it might kill him. You like him, Dara said. I'm considering it, Nia said, cautiously, with full documentation. Girl, you drew the man's soul in a notebook. That ship has sailed. But there was a thing Nia had seen from the very first night, a thing she'd named before she even knew his name, and it was the crack the whole thing would eventually run into. Lee Si-woo was real with her in private. In public, with the crowd watching, he was still the performance. And Nia had spent her life around men who kept the real thing behind a door and gave the world the polished version, and she had promised herself, a long time ago, that she would not be a secret. She would not be the true thing a man kept in a back room while he sold the crowd a story. She didn't say it. She waited to see if he'd figure it out himself. He didn't. The break came at a foundation dinner 6 weeks in. Another gala, another crowd. The whole Seoul set out in force, and Seoa among them, because Seoa had not forgotten being walked past on the night of the launch, and had spent 6 weeks deciding it would not stand. She found Nia by the bar, alone for a moment, and she came at her with a smile like a blade wrapped in silk. She was fluent enough in English to make sure it would land. You're the designer, Seoa said, sweetly, loud enough for the small circle around them to hear. The one from the launch. It's so brave, what you did that night, walking away from Si-woo like that. She let it hang. Of course, we all understood. You must have known he was only being kind. He collects interesting people, foreigners, artists, people with unusual stories. It makes the parties feel worldly. You were the entertainment. She smiled wider. It's nothing to be ashamed of. He's very generous with his attention. He gives it to everyone eventually. That's rather the point of him. The circle went quiet. It was a good attack, precise, aimed exactly at the thing an outsider in a room like this would be most afraid was true. And Nia held Seoa's gaze, unbothered, already forming the clean, level answer that would take the woman apart without raising her voice. Because Nia Warren did not need rescuing, and never had. But she didn't get to give it. Because Si-woo had crossed the room, drawn by the shift in the crowd, and he arrived at exactly the wrong moment, and he did exactly the wrong thing. He smoothed it over. He laughed, warmly, the practiced laugh, and put a light hand on Seoa's shoulder and said something charming and diffusing, some graceful nothing about how everyone at Daewon was family, and how talented Ms. Warren was, and how they were all so lucky to have her. The whole thing designed to lower the temperature and keep everyone comfortable, and make the moment disappear without anyone having to be wrong. He managed it. He managed Suma. He managed the crowd. He was, as always, magnificent at it. And he never once said the only thing that mattered, which was that Nia was not entertainment, that she was not a collected curiosity, that she was the woman he'd played piano for in the dark, the only person who'd ever seen him, and that Suma could take her cruelty and leave his building. He gave the crowd the performance. He did not give Nia the truth. In front of everyone, when it counted, he chose the comfort of the room over the one real thing in it. Nia understood it completely in about 2 seconds. She'd read him like a building on the first night, and now she watched the load fail exactly where she'd feared it would. She didn't make a scene. She simply set down her glass and thanked Seoa for the conversation, with a graciousness that was its own kind of devastating, and she found Si-woo's eyes for one long moment across the small circle. And what was in her face wasn't anger. It was disappointment, which was worse. And then, it was decision. She left the party. He found her at the elevators, and he knew. He'd felt it go wrong the instant it went wrong, and the charm was already scrambling to fix it. Nia. That was, Seoa is nobody. I handled it. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of a, you handled it, Nia said. She wasn't shouting. She was quiet and steady, and that was so much worse. Yeah, you always handle it. That's the whole problem, Si-woo. She stood there and called me your entertainment in front of a dozen people, and you had one chance to stand in that room and be a real man about it. And instead, you did the thing. The smoothing, the charm. You made everyone comfortable. The elevator arrived. She stepped in and turned to face him. You play me piano in the dark, where nobody can see, and in the light, when it costs you something, I'm a thing you manage. She held the door for a moment. I told you at the very beginning. I won't be a secret. I've been the real thing a man keeps in a back room before. I'm not doing it again. Not even for you. The disappointment in her voice was gentle and final. Finish your building, Mr. Lee. You didn't need me for the drainage anyway. The doors closed on the orange. No, tonight it was deep blue, on the deep blue dress and her steady, disappointed face. And Lee Si-woo stood alone at the elevators of his own party for the second time. And this time, it did not feel like the best thing that had ever happened to him. This time, it felt like watching the only load-bearing wall in his life walk out of the building. Her contract wrapped 11 days later. The plazas were designed. The Riverwalk resolved. The gardens saved from feeling like a parking lot. She had no reason to stay in Seoul, and every reason not to, and she booked a flight home to Chicago for the Friday. Si-woo did not handle it well, which was itself a kind of progress, because the old Si-woo would have handled it perfectly. He called, she let it go to voicemail, kindly. He did not send coffee, because he finally understood, too late, what the coffee had always been. He sat at the piano every night and could not play anything, because the one person who had ever heard it was leaving, and playing it alone again, the way he had for 10 years, now felt unbearable in a way it never had before she'd sat on that couch and stayed. You could just tell her, Ethan said. They were in Si-woo's office, the Han River going gray outside the glass. The real thing, the whole thing, out loud in daylight, where people can see. It's not complicated, Si-woo. It's the least complicated thing in the world. You're just terrified of it. She's already decided. She decided you were mostly decoration, and then you played her Chopin and proved her half wrong. People update. That's the whole point of people. Ethan stood. You've spent your entire life making sure nobody could ever leave you by making sure nobody ever got in. Congratulations. It worked perfectly. Nobody's in, and she's leaving anyway. He paused at the door. Your father taught you to keep everyone at arm's length so they couldn't hurt you. How's that going? You're 37, and the only person who ever saw you is about to get on a plane, and you're sitting here being managed by your own charm one last time. He left. Si-woo sat alone in the office as the light died, and after a while he opened the drawer of his desk, the one he never opened, and took out the thing he'd taken from the site office the day she stopped coming, the thing he'd told himself he was only keeping safe. It was the sketch. The one she'd drawn that first night at the piano. She'd left it, or given it, he'd never been sure which, torn from the notebook and set on the bench, and he'd carried it back to his office and put it in a drawer and not looked at it since. Because looking at it was unbearable. He looked at it now. The tired shoulders. The face with nothing selling on it. A man alone at a piano. Drawn by the one person who'd ever bothered to find the wall holding him up. On the back, in her quick hand, she'd written something he hadn't seen before. 4 words. This one is real. Lee Si-woo looked at the 4 words for a long time. Then he stood up, and for the first time in his adult life, he did something without first calculating how it would look. The gala for the topping out of Dawn Riverside was the following night, the last great event of the project. 300 people again, the same crowd. COA, the whole Seoul set assembled to watch Lee Si-woo be Lee Si-woo one more time. Nia's flight was Friday morning. Dara had, under gentle and repeated pressure from a Korean-American man named Ethan, who had somehow gotten her number, convinced Nia to come to the closing gala for 1 hour, for closure, for the project she'd poured herself into, and for no other reason, absolutely no other reason. Dara. Nia came in a simple black dress, no armor, planning to look at the finished plazas she'd designed and shake the right hands and leave. She did not plan to stay near the stage where Si-woo would give the host's remarks, the charming, gracious, forgettable remarks, because she had seen that performance and did not need to see it again. Sai-Wu took the microphone at 9. The room turned toward him the way it always did. Sai-Wu watched with a small, satisfied smile, certain the outsider had been handled and the natural order restored. Ethan stood at the back with his arms crossed and an expression of open, terrified hope. And Lee Si-Woo, the most charming man in Seoul, looked out at the 300 people who had spent their whole lives adoring what he represented and set down the remarks his office had prepared and did the single most uncharming thing he had ever done in his life. He told the truth. "I had a speech," he said. "It was very good. My team wrote it. It thanked all the right people and made you all feel wonderful for coming. And I could give it in my sleep, because I've been giving some version of it my entire life." He paused, and the pause was not for effect, and everyone could tell, because it was the first time they had ever seen Lee Si-Woo unsure. "The truth is, I don't know how to do this. What I'm about to do. I've never done it. I've spent 30 years being exactly what every room wanted, so that no one would ever get close enough to be disappointed by the actual person. And it worked. And it made me very successful, and very alone. And I didn't even know I was alone until someone walked into this building and refused to be charmed by me." The room had gone utterly silent. Nia had stopped near the back, very still. "Some of you were here the night she said no to me," Si-Woo said, and a low sound moved through the crowd. "In front of all of you. It's the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I didn't understand that until it was almost too late." He found her in the crowd, and he did not look away, and he did not turn it into a performance, and his voice was not smooth at all. "Nia, you told me you wouldn't be a secret, that I play the real thing in the dark and give the crowd a story. You were right. 3 weeks ago, Seo-ah stood in a room and insulted you, and I smoothed it over instead of standing up, because standing up would have cost me something, and I have spent my whole life not paying." He took a breath. "So I'm paying now. In the light, in front of everyone whose opinion I've spent my life managing." He looked, just once, at Seo-ah, and then back at Nia. "You are not entertainment. You are the only person who has ever seen me, and I let you walk out of this building, because I was more afraid of this room than I was of losing you, and that is the most cowardly thing I have ever done, and I would like, if you'll let me, to spend a long time being braver." 300 people turned, as one, to look at the woman in the black dress at the back of the room. Nia Warren stood there with every eye and soul on her, the outsider, the entertainment, the woman who read buildings, and she did not perform anything either. She let the silence sit for a moment, because she was not a person who gave things away cheaply, and Lee Si-Woo stood on that stage and let her, and did not fill the silence with charm, which was how she knew, finally, that he'd actually learned. "That was not smooth," she said at last, across the whole quiet room. "That was genuinely terrible. You have no idea how to do this." "None," he agreed. "Good," Nia said, "because I'm not interested in the version of you that knows how to do this. I never was." And the corner of her mouth moved, the real one, and she started walking toward the stage, unhurried, the way she did everything, while 300 people who had never once seen anything walked toward Lee Si-Woo, instead of away, watched it happen, with their mouths open. She stopped at the foot of the stage and looked up at him. "You kept the sketch," she said. "It's the only real thing I own." "I know," she said. "That's why I left it." She held out her hand, and this time, in the light, in front of everyone, she was the one offering. "Come down here, Mr. Lee. Nobody in this room has ever seen you play. I think it's time they did." He came down off the stage. He did not take the microphone, or make a joke, or manage the moment. He walked past all of it to the piano in the corner that everyone had always assumed was decoration, and he sat down, and Nia Warren sat beside him on the bench, closed this time, and Lee Si-Woo played the nocturne his mother taught him, the real thing, badly in 1 or 2 places, for 300 people, and for the one who'd found the wall holding him up, all at once, for the first time in his life not selling a single thing. They didn't rush anything after that, because she wouldn't, and because he was, at last, learning to move at the speed of true things instead of the speed of charm. She didn't get on the Friday flight. She didn't move into the penthouse either, not for a long time, and she kept her own apartment and her own name, and her own life on her own terms. and made him earn every inch of the ground he gained. And he found, to his endless surprise, that earning it was the only thing in his whole charmed life that had ever felt like being alive. He stopped hosting the parties where nobody could see him. He started keeping the piano lid open. Ethan took credit for the entire relationship at every possible opportunity and was, annoyingly, not entirely wrong. Seoa found someone new to orbit within the month. And on the quiet nights, the best ones, Lee Se-woo would play in a room that was no longer dark, and Nia would sketch him in the worn field notebook, page after page, the same man, the real one, over and over, until there were no more walls left in him she hadn't found. That's the whole story. The most charming man in Seoul, and the one woman who wasn't buying it, and everything that got real the moment somebody finally said no. Nobody rescued Nia Warren. She was never chasing anything. She just walked into a room full of people falling over a man, saw straight through the performance to the lonely person underneath, and refused to want him until he was brave enough to be seen. And that, in the end, was the only thing that ever could have saved him. If this one got you, do 3 quick things for me. Tap that like button so more people find it. Subscribe, because the next story is going to stay with you even longer. And down in the comments, tell me one word for the feeling of being truly seen by someone, for the first time, exactly as you are. I read every single one. Until next time, remember, the right person won't need you to perform. They'll just want the one you keep in the dark. Take care of yourselves.